My name's Lance DeVoe. I'm the naturalist with the City of Rochester Hills. I've been here 31 years. So been through a lot of interesting things with the deer over that amount of time. It used to be we didn't hardly ever see any deer, and it was a big deal when we did. Then it went to saw them a little more often and started hitting them with cars, and it kind of became a bigger deal then. And now, of course, they're all over everywhere, and we've been through EHD where we probably buried 50 or 60 deer just in our parks alone. I was a city representative during the deer call that some of you might remember back in 2009, and provided the biological information to the DNR. When you do a call like that, you have to provide them with information from each deer that's killed. So I was the unfortunate person that got to do that. So now we're here to talk about some of the, I'm guessing some of the problems that some of you have with deer and your landscaping and your plants and so forth. So before we get to our guests here, I wanted to share a couple things with you because I know many of you, I also handle all the wildlife related calls for the city, so I hear all the frustration from the residents that call that have problems with the deer. So I'm somewhat sympathetic to that and deal with it on a daily basis. So with that being said, I can tell you there's unfortunately no magic bullet. We're not going to tell you anything tonight that's going to solve all your deer problems. But what I can tell you is that deer are animals that are based all around how much motivation they have to feed. And so they're just doing what comes naturally to them, which is to eat 6 to 7 pounds of leafy vegetative matter per day per deer. Yeah, they eat a lot. And so when they can't find it in healthy habitat like there is behind us, where there's oak trees and understory and new growth and things for them to eat, they're going to find it somewhere else. And so depending on where you live determines how motivated that deer is to feed in your yard. So if you live, let's say, off of Tinkin Road on Fairview Farms, where there's a small band of commons area surrounded by subdivision, guess what? They can't find enough to eat in that commons area. They're going to come out and eat in your yard. They're one way or another. They have a crazy desire to survive, as all wild animals do, and when they're in that motivated state, it's hard to stop them. So hopefully you can take away some strategies today. It takes persistence. It takes a multifaceted approach. There's some deer coming out of the winter. You can see their hip bones. You can see the bones in their legs that should be filled in. That's what happens when they're in poor habitat and are struggling to find enough to eat. So you can imagine how good your hostas or your other plants look to them. So you know, it takes a concerted effort to stop them, and you have to be as persistent as they are in doing so. There are products that do work, but they have to be applied every time after it rains. You can't go away for a week on vacation and expect you're going to come back and find all your plants there. So, and then the multifaceted approach is use different techniques, whether it's deer-resistant plants, along with repellents, along with fencing. I've seen it all. You know, I've seen one of my neighbors has these huge arborvitaes. They're probably 12 or 14 feet tall. They completely cover them with the black netting every winter time, and they have no browse line on their arbs whatsoever. Mine are eating 6 feet up all the way around on every one of them. So you can stop them, but it takes a concerted effort to do so. So hopefully Kim and Monique will be able to share with you some of the things that they do and some of the products that they have. Kim Mishark is from Bordines, and she's nice enough to spend some time with us. And I'm going to stick around till the end and answer any questions that you might have about deer behavior and any other questions about deer in the city that you might think of. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kim, and we'll get the ball rolling. Oh, look at there.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm short, so I have to adjust this a little bit. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, my name is Kim. I'm the nursery manager at the Bordines here in Rochester Hills. I've done a few of these deer seminars over the last couple years. Usually a pretty good turnout. I'm going to talk about a few different things. So some of that will be plant material that you can choose from that's going to be considered a little bit more deer resistant, and also some of the products that you can use along with that. A couple things, like Lance was saying, yes, the deer are going to go after your landscape for multiple reasons. There's not a lot for them to feed on, but most people, you're taking care of your plants. So you have irrigation, you're fertilizing, they're healthy, happy plants. I kind of compare it to going to the grocery store. If you're going to the produce section, you're going to pick the ripest, nicest fruit rather than something that's rotten. That's kind of what the deer are doing in your landscape. So if you take care of your plants, those plants are going to look much more delicious to the deer. Make sense? Also, another thing that we always kind of joke about is, yes, there are deer-resistant plants, but if they're starving, they're pretty much going to eat anything. So nothing is 100% deer-resistant. We always have the joke that deer don't read. They don't know what they're not supposed to eat. So we hand all these brochures out that give you different plants and stuff. But again, nothing is 100%. So kind of keep that in mind. If you have an area that they tend to feed heavily in, you're probably going to not want to put things like hostas, arborvitaes that they tend to love because they will decimate them. Even using all those products, you're still going to have issues. So I did have a couple handouts here. So the plant guide kind of lists our perennials, trees, and shrubs that we sell for the majority. So it's a good reference point. There's also the one I'm going to cover for top deer-resistant plants. I'm going to go over these kind of briefly. These are kind of what I call the purple people's chosen tried and true plants, because these are things that we've all planted in our yard. We have issues with deer, and we've never had an issue with them usually feeding on these. So there is a more extensive list here. It's the deer-resistant plants. Some of these, we're actually in the process of kind of revising this right now, because some of the things that are on here still might have somewhat of an issue with deer. I also recommend checking out Michigan State Extension Services. They have a very good handout that lists out several plants that are considered deer resistant. That's annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs. And the way that they list them is basically it's rarely fed upon, like seldom, sometimes fed upon, and then more frequently fed upon. So they kind of grade it out of the plants in 4 different sections. Some that are, again, rarely, if ever, an issue for them to feed on, others that they are more frequently feeding on. So again, if you have an area that you're landscaping in, you know that deer tend to feed really heavily in that area, you're probably not going to want to put something that's on that, frequently fed upon list. So why don't we start with just this handout here, the top resistant plants. And again, I just kept it brief. There's many more than this. These are just 5 from each different category: annuals, perennials, and then trees and shrubs. So annuals, obviously the benefit to having annuals in your garden is it kind of gives you some color year round. Instead of having perennial garden where you're trying to, have something that blooms for a couple weeks. Again, annuals give you color all year round, or containers as well. Wax begonias are a great one. They're rarely, if ever, fed upon, and the nice thing about those is you can put them in full sun to full shade. So that really gives you a wide range of areas that you can use them, whether that be in containers or, like I said, planting around a flower bed as well. Zinnias are another one, very colorful flowers. Usually you can get those anywhere from like a 10-inch to a 36-inch range. So multiple different sizes, like I said, multiple different colors. And only thing with those is they do need full sun. So if you have a shaded area, you're probably not going to go with that. Dusty Miller, again, it's more of kind of like that dusty gray color, but it's more of a full sun, upright, about 12 inches to 14 inches in height. Never really get fed on those. The Mexican heather or the cupia, more of a mounding habit, about a foot tall. And then the angelonia, upright, around 16 to 20 inches. That's full sun as well. So those are all annuals that you can choose from that you should not have an issue with deer feeding on. When you get into perennials, obviously this is stuff that's going to come back every year. And that's where I have more complaints with customers. Again, I work out in the nursery, so it makes sense. But, you know, with their trees, shrubs, perennials that are getting eaten to the ground, especially hostas. So if anyone has hostas, they have a lot of shade, and you're looking for something that might be a good alternative to that. Ferns are great because they'll obviously tolerate full shade. You have ranges and sizes that you can go with. And you know, so it's something that you could choose instead of putting a hosta. Palmaneria is another perennial that's very good for full shade or part sun. It has a nice foliage to it, so like a hosta, it kind of has that kind of grayish white foliage. It flowers in April, but it kind of looks nice all year long. So it's something, you know, it's a good choice alternative to a hosta. Nice thing with the palmaneria, and this is kind of what I recommend. I'll get into it a little bit more in a few minutes, but it's kind of a very like fuzzy leaf to it. So because of the texture, it tends not to be fed on by deer. Coneflowers, again, another, you know, full sun perennial, but the nice thing about those is you get flowers for, you know, 8 to 12 weeks. Deer tend to avoid them, and they have so many varieties. It used to be just like the purple coneflower, and now there's yellows, whites, greens, different salmon colors. I mean, I think we have like 20-something varieties of coneflower that we carry alone, and they can range anywhere from like, you know, around 20 to 24 inches, so they're a little bit more compact than some of the older varieties that tend to get like 3 feet tall. So again, great option for, you know, deer-resistant plants. Pretty much all your grasses are going to be deer-resistant. So grasses are, again, a great. Nice thing about some of your grasses is it can give you a little bit of privacy. So on some of those taller grasses that can get like 5 to 6 feet, it gives you a little privacy. It's deer resistant. And even in the winter, it does have a little bit of winter interest. A lot of people don't cut theirs back to the spring, so they have, you know, something to just kind of shield, you know, and the plumes as well will kind of offer a little bit of something as well. Salvia is another one, more because of the scent. Like some of those heavily scented plants, heavily textured plants, picky things, deer tend to avoid. That's not always the case, but they tend to avoid those. Again, it's a perennial. It's going to bloom in June. And those usually about 16 to 20 inches of the average size of those. And then we get into kind of some of the shrubs. I'm definitely more of a tree and shrub person. I do perennials, and tree and shrub is my department, but I always kind of favor trees and shrubs. That's my favorite part of it. So one thing, not a lot of people know about it, but Abelia it's an early spring flowering shrub, but it has a nice fall color to it. Gets about 5 to 6 feet tall. Deer never really feed on it, and it's a fragrant flower in the spring. Boxwood are great. I don't know if I've ever had anyone, I think one customer told me that they had a deer eat their boxwood, and that's kind of doubtful. So they never go after boxwood, so it's a great hedge plant. Again, you know, pretty much full sun to part shade on that. You're pretty much guaranteed that they're not going to feed on them. Lilacs also tend to be deer resistant as well. It can make a good hedge plant because some of them will get up to 12 feet tall. Granted, it's not an evergreen, but you can make a screen with them. Early spring bloomer. And then we listed the Sitka spruce because it is very, very, very pokey. But spruce in general, quotation marks, in general tend to be deer resistant. However, I have seen deer eating a Colorado blue spruce, and if you've ever touched those things, they're not very comfortable. But they do tend to be a little bit more deer resistant just because of the actual texture of them. And then privet hedge, again, it's an alternative to an arborvitae. A lot of people, because probably the most common things I have people ask me is I want something deer resistant. I don't want to see my neighbors. I want to put up a hedge. Yeah, those are probably my 2 most common questions that I get. So everyone wants to put arborvitae hedges in, and obviously the deer love the arborvitae. So they're, you know, unless you plan on religiously spraying them and other things, it's not always the best plant to go with if you tend not to be one that is going to be spraying once a week, or, you know, you don't have the right conditions for it. So a privet hedge is a good alternative because they're not going to feed on it. They can get up to 10 feet tall. Again, it's not an evergreen, you know, but it's a good alternative to that. Boxwoods are going to range anywhere from about 2 feet to about 5 feet roughly. They are very slow growers though, usually only a couple inches a year. And then obviously the other issue with sometimes boxwoods is if you have a really harsh winter, sometimes you can get a little bit of winter burn and things like that. So it's not something that you would necessarily put out in an open area. You might have to offer a little bit of winter protection for them. So, well, I guess we can do questions later. So I'm going to go over a little bit of just in general kind of tips of the type of plants that you might want to choose from, and then I'm going to cover a little bit of some of the products that you can use and things to consider when you're using them as well. So like I said, kind of think texture, scent, things like that tend to be a little bit more deer resistant. So if you're looking for a hedge planting, like I said, if you're set on having an evergreen, sometimes a juniper, an upright juniper is a good alternative to that. However, I have seen them eat juniper as well. So the pickier it is, usually the less likely they are to feed on it. So kind of keep that in mind. But they are definitely going to be more deer resistant than what an arborvitae is. And the other thing that I would say on most evergreens is a lot of people are really great at, hey, it's, everything's starting to flush out, I need to start spraying for the deer. They kind of forget about everything in the wintertime. Well, in the wintertime, that's usually when they're starving the most. So that's when usually most of your evergreens are going to get decimated by the deer. So you really need to consider, a protective screen, whether, I know Monique's going to talk a little bit about that, but screening them, but also spraying them in the winter. Using your chemical treatments in the winter on your evergreens and things like that, even more so than you do in the summer, because there's more things for them to feed on during the spring and summer months, where in the winter, a lot of stuff is buried under the ground and they're going after your evergreens. Or if you really like that kind of drumstick lollipop look, because that's kind of what they turn into if you're not, spraying them or protecting them. So, and again, like on a lot of your sprays and things like that, it recommends that you do most of them will say every 30 days. Now, if you have a heavy feeding area, again, they tend to frequently eat out of your yard, you're looking at probably once a week. And the other thing that a lot of people don't think of, because it always says on there, if it rains, yes, I have to go out and reapply. Well, how many people have an irrigation or a sprinkler system in their yards? Probably a lot. So if any of your plants are getting hit by that sprinkler system, then you're going to have to apply more frequently. So you're washing away a lot of that product with your, sprinkler system. So now you have great, well taken care of plants that are delicious, and your deer product that you're putting on, you're washing off. So I know it's very frustrating, and I get everyone's frustration with it. And like I said, there is no easy solution. A lot of it is just, it's like multifaceted, like, Lance said, it's picking the right plants for the area, using the right products to try to keep them out. And, sometimes it's physical barriers. It's all of that combined that is going to give you the most success. Like I said, no perfect solution. But a lot of those products, there's multiple different products out there. Liquid Fence is probably our #1 seller. And that one, I know it says, I think it's like every 7 days that you're supposed to put it down. And again, after a heavy rain, it does smell. It does kind of have a foul smell to it. So if you have a garden close to like a patio or something that you're eating on, or you're putting it on your containers, might not be the product that you want to go with. If you've had issues, like you've used that product for, for a long time and all of a sudden it's not working anymore, sometimes you got to switch things up a little bit. They get used to it and it's not as effective. So we recommend, occasionally changing a product, not all the time, but especially if you've used something that you've had luck with and all of a sudden it's no longer effective, then you might need to change to a different product. There are granulars, there's, sprays, there's several different things that you can use. So I'm just going to kind of touch briefly on a lot of those. So like I said, the Liquid Fence is a spray, kind of a foul odor to them. There are other ones that have more of, like, I don't want to say a pleasant odor, but not as bad. Same kind of thing. It's supposed to deter by the scent. A lot of them will have like a dried blood in them. Again, it's kind of to try to trigger the fear response as well. Even after you use a lot of these products, though, sometimes it takes a little bit. So they might still feed on it, they just don't like the taste of it. So if you put a product on and you spray it, then they'll come back to it. Don't give up. Again, it's supposed to taste bad to them, so they might feed, before it's actually effective. And although I think every product will kind of tell you that if you have, again, a heavy deer problem there, to use it a little bit more frequently and to apply it a little bit heavier. So I know like one of the granulars, it's a new product that we started carrying this year. It's called Deer Scram. And it's a dry blood, and it's got like some different, like I think it's got garlic and a few other things in it. And it's a granular that you put at the base, but it'll tell you, I think you do it about 2 feet away from the garden, and it's usually like a 16-inch, you're putting it down heavy so you can actually see it on the ground, 16-inch wide. But if it's a heavy area where they feed a lot, then you're supposed to do that up to 2 feet wide and a little bit heavier. So a lot of those perimeter things are great for like vegetable gardens, things like that, because nobody wants to put a lot of those products. You don't want to spray it on something that you're going to eat. There are sprays, like I think hot pepper wax is something that you can actually spray on the plant, and it's safe to wash off and eat. But most sprays are going to be more for like plants that you're not going to eat. If you're doing like a vegetable garden or something that you're trying to keep them out of, I would do like the granular at the base, or like I said, the hot pepper wax is a possibility. Or there are also stakes that you can use, and the stakes, I think you do them every 4 feet. The nice thing about those is they are all season long, so you use them once. So it's basically your growing season, and that's all you have to put them. Like I said, it's every 4 feet apart. You can do them in a vegetable garden. What I have heard is they are pretty effective, especially for containers. However, again, if it's in an area where you tend to have heavy feeding, sometimes you have to use another product on top of it. So like I said, there's not a perfect solution to everything, and I know it's very frustrating. Sometimes, it's trial and error, and I always take feedback from customers that will tell me, things that worked great for them, and someone might have something that works great for them, and then their neighbor tried the same product and didn't have as much success. So like I said, unfortunately, a lot of times it is a little bit of trial and error. So yes, it's, again, multifaceted approach to try to keep them away, but those are kind of some of the suggestions I have. I'm more than willing to, have some questions or whatever afterwards, but right now I think I'm going to pass it along to Monique. So, okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Monique Balaban. I am a member of the Deer Management Advisory Committee. Since the inception of DMAC in 2009, I have been volunteering and meeting with residents to help guide them in being successful in having a beautiful garden and deterring deer from their landscape. Today, I wanted to help and bring up for discussion some of the solutions that I have been trying for many years. And as everyone has said, it's a trial and error. And you have to try a combination of products. And you do have to keep that in mind. Implementing the combination of these solutions simultaneously is highly recommended, which will result in a much greater success. Kim did a great job. She went over the detail in regards to the countless of deer-resistant plant materials. And like she said, they offer annuals, perennials, evergreens. And that is true. Michigan State has a great website. You can just easily go to their website and download all the information as far as the deer-resistant plants and which ones are more effective than others. I wanted to bring to your attention a couple great examples, and so now I was talking to Kim about it, and she had mentioned that out of all the arborvitae family, this is the most that people find where they're more resistant to deer. And the two, one of them is the arborvitae look-alike, which everyone loves, and the other one is the yew. Those two plants are not the arborvitaes and they're not the yews. They're actually the Spring Grove Western arborvitae, which it's also resistant to the cold winters in Michigan. And then the yew look-alike, it's called the fine line buckthorn, and it also is utilized as a beautiful hedge, but also in addition as a specimen accent plant. Now, we're going to talk about repellents on my end also. And personally, I love using liquid fence. According to the peer-reviewed studies, the following repellents were highly rated. You've got liquid fence, Hinder, Bobex, and Deer Stopper. As Kim had mentioned, and Lance, you need to take a look at, it's very important to look at the manufacturer's directions when applying these repellents. Any one of these, including liquid fence, must be applied, as it's already been reiterated, must be applied after every time it rains. And what I usually like to do is not only plant them on the plant material itself, but you take liquid fence and you form a fence around the perimeter of where you want them to be protected and to deter deer from coming in. I usually use a 2.5 liquid gallon concentrated formula of the liquid fence, and it lasts sometimes 2-3 years. The easiest way that I manage to treat a number of different beds is you take an 8 ounce of the concentrated liquid fence, you add a gallon of water, you mix it really well, then you pour it into that watering can, a large watering can, and this is so simple and efficient. You go around with the watering can within minutes. I have numerous beds that I have treated. And you don't even have to go with the can and with the liquid spray where you constantly have to spray it and your hand hurts. And so I found a solution for a large area that you want to spray liquid fence in. And it's extremely effective. It's always worked for me, and I've had great response from other people that have mentioned the same thing. Not only that, but it's very important when Kim was mentioning that people forget about spraying in the winter. It's more critical to spray, it's equally critical to spray in the winter as it is in the summer. I not only spray in the summer, but in the winter I spray the arborvitaes, and they really do keep away from the deer if you regularly spray them and treat the areas. Let's see here. I wanted to give you a sample of a test garden that we did in 2009 here on the property of City Hall, and it was in an area where it was highly populated with deer. In garden number 1, we planted all the plants that deer love to eat, but we didn't treat it. We didn't put any kind of repellent on it. In garden number 2, we planted the exact same plants that deer love, but we treated it with liquid fence. And in the third garden, we had plants that were deer resistant in the third garden. So by the end of summer, when we found the results, it was pretty much like what we expected. The first garden, the deer browsed, they ate quite a bit of the plants, and they were struggling to regrow because it wasn't treated with liquid fence. Now, in the second garden, which are the same exact plants that were treated, the deer left them alone, they didn't browse, they weren't interested in eating them, and it was a success. We had full blooms and everything was looking great, and they did not eat the plants. And then in the third garden, again, that Lance and I actually went and picked out the plants at Bordine, and we had them planted, and they actually were deer resistant, and they weren't touched, and it was they weren't disturbed, and they were able to become fully grown, which was another great success. Let's see here. Now we're going to go to barriers. Another convenient an effective method of deterring deer is to create this fence. And what I like to do is you install 6 feet or taller metal stakes or metal posts around 6 feet apart, but you keep enough distance from the plants so the deer cannot reach them. Then you take 5 foot tall or higher heavy-duty wire fencing, and you attach it using electrical ties to the posts. Now, I've never had any problems in the winter because you have to make sure you keep it far enough away from the deer so they can't reach in and eat them. And what the great thing about this wire fencing, it's available in 50-foot long sections. It's heavy-duty. It's a one-time investment. You can purchase it at Home Depot or Tractor Supply. It's easy to install, and it can be utilized every single year. And that's my favorite, is because you can't, it's kind of concealed, and you don't really see it when you have it around a beautiful hedge of arborvitaes and that. So the other way you can also form a barrier is to use burlap. You can either wrap them the way they're in the photo, and it not only protects them from the deer, but it protects them from the harsh winters. Or you can also form a fence just like you did with the heavy-duty wire on posts, and that also helps tremendously. And then I have a few other deterrents that I wanted to bring to your attention. And again, everyone keeps saying that it's a multifaceted approach, and it is true. If you use a combination of these products that have been proven to be effective, it eventually works out, because the deer, if you try one product, they might think in their minds, okay, well, I'm going to go over here, and but you have to be persistent. The key is to be persistent and to try a number of different products. The first one that I wanted to talk about is this original, you take an original Irish spring soap in a lint catcher. You attach an electrical tie, and you hang it on any tree or shrub branch. I usually put it on different types of arbs, and you can, the nice thing about it, you can actually hang it from the interior part, and it has such a strong sense of smell, that it actually does deter the deer away. Another solution, which is called Aspect Tech, which is the one on the left, all the way to the left. It's a Yard Sentinel ultrasonic outdoor animal repellent, and you plug it into your outdoor electrical outlet. The purpose of this, it releases ultrasonic noise, which is detected only by wildlife. It covers up to 5,000 square feet, and it's equally effective not just for the deer, but other small mammals that tend to go into your landscape, like rabbits and groundhogs. And then if you need additional square footage than the maximum amount that it covers of 5,000 square feet, you can plug one in the front of the house, one in the back of the house, and you can even extend it further into the lawn or into the landscape by attaching an extension cord, which it's really, it works really well. Now, and another thing too, I wanted to say, just moving away from the deer a little bit, these little ultrasonic issues, I've had people tell me that they've actually purchased the little ones that you plug into your interior of the house, and it prevents little mice or any other little rodents that can enter the house. And people have put them in their attic, they've placed them in their home, but it's just little outlets that you plug right into your outlet, and they seem to work also inside the house, which is a little different than what this larger unit is that you plug into the outdoor socket. The one in the center is the Scarecrow, and how this product works, it's a motion-activated sprinkler that scares the deer away if they enter within the range of the sensor. It is available in a solar powered or battery operated and covers up to 1,200 square feet. And then if you need to cover a larger area than 1,200 square feet, you can actually link several scarecrows together. And so again, I always like to use a combination of scarecrow and a couple aspect techs throughout the yard, and they're pretty good deterrents. Now, in the last solution that I hear more and more great things about, I've never tried it, but I do hear great things about it. It's called the moving dog decoys, and that's the dog on the right. You place these moving dog decoys in designated areas of the garden and landscape, giving the deer the illusion that a predator is nearby, and it encourages them to stay away. What is so unique about this product, which is different than your typical coyote decoy, is that it has a steel spring, and which allows this dog decoy to move in the wind. So it makes it feel like it makes it look like it's a real dog chasing them out of the yard. In fact, golf courses, I read up on it, and a number of golf courses like to use this product because it deters even geese away from the golf courses. And even it deters other wildlife as well. So that's about everything that I can offer at this time, and I wanted to thank you for your time, and I hope that by going over these number of solutions that you will not only be successful for this summer, but many more summers in the futures. So thank you for your time, and I hope that I was helpful in some way. Okay.
So I forgot to mention this earlier, but last year I saw a lot of it. So even with deer-resistant plants, what I see a lot of, especially in trees, mostly in trees, young trees, is buck rub. And usually that's late summer to early, winter. And last year, not kidding, I had 2 or 3 customers come in a day that the deer just snapped their tree in half. And again, it's a deer-resistant plant. They're not eating them, they're rubbing them. So usually any trees you have up to a 4-inch caliber is where it's going to be an issue. And the only way that you can really prevent that is by a physical barrier. And that's usually like some sort of fencing around it. You can get the trunk guards that you wrap around them, which obviously will help with the rub. But if it's a smaller tree, again, they can snap them in half. I had a customer bring in a picture of a Japanese maple that she had purchased, and she showed me pictures. She did put up a physical barrier. She had the trunk wrap. It plowed over a 6-foot fence and snapped her tree right in half. So keep that in mind if you're planting trees. They'll do it to shrubs and other things, but you tend to see it on trees mostly, and it's your younger trees. So it can be deer resistant, but it's not buck resistant, and that's kind of late summer, early winter. That's usually an issue. So just try to make sure to protect those. And I think that was all I had to add, so thank you.
Let me just add real quick to that note. Instead of wrapping it with like the drain tile, the plastic that actually goes around the trunk of the tree, build the barrier using fence stakes and make a square around the tree so they can't actually push against it. And you only have to leave it up, like Kim said, like primary rub time is October and November. By December, they're pretty much done doing that. So you don't have to leave it up year round, but that way they can't push and actually snap it off, even though it's covered. You've created that barrier. And it's the same thing too with barriers. Deer, even though obviously they can jump a 6-foot fence, but they also need a place to land. So when you create a barrier, the distance away from the hedge or the arbor, whatever it is you're trying to protect, is important, because you want it just far enough that they can't reach their head over, but not so far that they can jump over it and land next to the shrub. So it's kind of, and also their depth perception isn't very good. So, and they they can only jump in one dimension. They either jump up or they jump out. They can't jump out and up. So barriers can be real effective even if they're not super tall. Now, I do know people in the city that have 10-foot fences around their entire property, but I'm guessing that most of you are not interested in doing that, or you have deed restrictions or neighborhood restrictions that wouldn't allow that anyway. So I think with that, this is being recorded, so if you have any questions, I'm going to repeat the question for the recording, and then whoever wants to take the question, they'll do it. Unless we don't have any questions, and then we'll go from there. Yes?
I wonder why we can't get to the root cause of the problem and eliminating some of the deer.
Okay, her question, did y'all hear that about, instead of coming up with creative ways to work within the framework of the system of attacking the deer themselves? And that's a difficult question to answer in a simple fashion. Part of the problem is, and it's not just in Rochester Hills, but it's in urban and suburban areas across the United States, is in areas like Rochester Hills, we have an ordinance against hunting. And a ban on discharging firearms for obvious reasons. And unfortunately, that's the management technique that is used across the country for controlling white-tailed deer. So, the call that we did in 2009, some of you were probably here for that. 16 deer were shot in 4 weeks. It was on property under city control like this, that really, even if that program were undertaken again, it had little effect on the problems that you people are experiencing. And so the type of control of a wild animal population that's free ranging in a city of 32 square miles, you can see what the problem is, even if we didn't have the ordinances in place that prohibit that kind of activity. So I've had this discussion with numerous people over the years, and for the most part, and you may or may not belong in this group, but most people, even if they didn't want the deer in their neighborhood, wouldn't want someone shooting them in their backyard. So it becomes a difficult problem from that standpoint. And so what's happening now is there's constantly scientific solutions that are trying to be worked out to control animal populations in a way that isn't as invasive as the tactics that are currently employed. So those things just haven't been perfected yet. For instance, contraceptive type devices that aren't so invasive, like they did in Ann Arbor, where they actually darted the deer and had to have a veterinarian actually perform the neutering of that deer and then bringing it back. So it was hugely expensive and just not hugly effective for the way they had to go about it. But those things science is always changing, and that's an area that is constantly being looked at. So that's kind of the medium answer to that. Not too short, but yes. Yeah, they're mostly scent based, because that smell is not favored by the deer. I actually like that technique of putting something on the ground as well as spraying the plant, so you kind of hit them as they're coming up to a bed. There's the bad smell, but you're going to be able to smell it too. I think Kim said most of you probably sprayed liquid fence or a similar product, and you can smell it when you put it out there. And if the wind's blowing the wrong way and your windows are open, you get to smell it in your house too. So I know every time my wife's out spraying, when I'm in the house, of course, sitting on the couch, I I can smell it and I know what's going on out there. So, like I said in the opening, if you're in one of those motivated deer areas, you know, like those test gardens we did on this property, which, you know, there's hundreds of acres of oaks and forests and new growth, and so those deer aren't as motivated as ones that you have in your neighborhood or in a subdivision. So it's a little bit different and a little bit tougher in those. I've been to some of the spots off of Grandview, you know, off of Tinkin Road and Fairview Farms, and gone into those commons areas, and some of them are pretty big, 50 acres in size, and there's not a plant on the ground below 6 feet. And I've actually had the deer come up to me. So I think in the past, you know, people must have been feeding them because they come trotting, you know, it's like, whoa. Yeah, they take a lot to scare. It's crazy. So those places are extremely difficult to stop the deer. But we do have a deer feeding ban as well as another one of our ordinances that was enacted when the Deer Management Committee was formed. That was one of the first things that happened, and I don't know that it stops everyone from feeding them, but it certainly slowed it. Yes, sir.
How would you report someone that you know is feeding deer?
Call the building department, and that's where ordinance enforcement is out of, and they'll go out and check it out. Sometimes I do, depends on who's available, but you know, we'll go out and take pictures, and then they get a notice that, you know, when there's carrots on the ground, it's pretty obvious that that's not feeding the birds. And they're orange, so they stick out real good in the picture, you know. So, yes, sir.
Is it also illegal to put out a software for the deer?
Yep, same thing. Yeah, and they're easy to get pictures of too. You know, we like to have some evidence when we approach them, so they can't just tell us that wasn't them. So.
If you go to this person's house and talk to them and they don't stop, then they get a ticket for that?
Yep, they can get fined. Yeah, it would start with yeah. I mean, I'm not advocating that you know, start a feud with your neighbor, but by all means, you know, if my next door neighbor was feeding the deer, I'd go and talk to him and say, hey, you know, well, deer are browsing animals by nature. They don't just go to your food pile or your arbs or your ewes. They go from spot to spot to spot, and they keep moving. It's their strategy for survival is to not stay in one place very long. So even if you think, you know, there's some thought that, well, if you had a place where you fed them, maybe they'd stay out of your yard, but that's not how they do it. They go and they eat a little bit here and there, and they keep moving, and then they go and lay down just like a cow and chew their cud and regurgitate their food the same way all ruminant animals do. So that's their strategy, so they're not putting themselves at risk. They browse, move along, then go find a safe place to lay down, which it might be in your yard, because they figured out that your yard underneath your pine tree is a safer spot than bedding down out here in the woods where there's more coyotes and other things to harass them. So, but that's what they do. So feeding them is not a good way to stop them from feeding on your plants. They're going to do it. They're going to do it anyway. Yes, sir.
What are the two best places to buy these products then?
So she said any place that sells garden products is going to have the repellents, even like Home Depot and Lowe's and those places carry them.
Yeah, Home Depot definitely carries the ultrasonic unit.
Okay.
If you can't find any of the items at Home Depot or Tractor Supply, you can just go online and search if even Amazon carries them.
So you wouldn't be have all this stuff and then
Yeah, I think your question was, even if you do all this stuff, there's a chance that the deer are still going to eat your plants? Yeah, I mean, we had an old adage that when it comes to deer, it's fence or share. So the fence is 100%. The fence, you know, a barrier that stops them from getting to it. But other than that, you know, you can do everything, as Kim said, and there's no plant that's a guaranteed 100%. Maybe Japanese barberry. I've never seen them eat that. There's places, you know, it's an invasive species. I don't necessarily recommend it, but barberry, they don't eat it. It's got it has a spine all the way down every branch, and it's super pokey. And there's places in the woods where you go out and that's the only thing growing in the understory in some woodlots where there's lots of deer is Japanese barberry. It's kind of interesting. Box was probably even better.
I have a question. What about the coyotes? Is there any chance that they're going to grow like the deer have?
No, you know, that's a completely different style of animal in the way that, because in this area it's a top level predator, so they're in competition for food, whereas herbivores like deer, they can find food so readily available that their population can grow, whereas predators like coyotes, because they're highly territorial and they have a big home range, they don't really overpopulate the way deer can. Yeah, they're pretty much everywhere in the city. She said about the population, which was her question earlier, and we kind of addressed that there's really it's really not as simple as you have to remember a deer as a wild animal. You know, it's a 150-pound animal, and there's maybe conservatively 2,000 of them in the city, let's say. So for there to be an effect on the general public to see a decrease in the number of deer, you know, someone would have to somehow eliminate half of them for you to actually notice a difference on your property. Yeah, so, you know, if there were a way, believe me, if there were a way to do it, you know, it would be done countrywide. Now, I do know of municipalities that have undergone that they've had town meetings like this and have agreed to allow people to shoot them in their yards. You know, that's the kind of program that if you're going to do it citywide and make a difference for all of you folks, that's the kind of program that right now it would take to eliminate that many deer. And maybe some of you would think, hey, you know, sign me up, but a whole bunch of people wouldn't. And like I said, right now we have ordinances against. We couldn't do it even if we wanted to. You know, that sounds funny, but that actually used to be a method. It was called trap and transfer, and they do it in an. Unfortunately, I took part in some of these activities as well. The best way to do it is with a blast net, and you bait the deer into an area and you shoot a net over them, and then you put them in a truck and you drive them to. That's no longer allowed. It's horrible. It's just it's not a good way to do it, and the state of Michigan doesn't allow it anymore. So you can't transfer, you can't dart a deer and transfer it. You can't move them to another part. And the state's got close to 2 million deer. There's no place that wants the deer from, you know, it'd be like taking geese from here and taking them somewhere else. Other people don't want them either. So believe me, there's all of these activities, the contraceptives, the trap and transfer, the netting them, the sharpshooting, and you know, restricted bow hunts and crossbows and elevated tree stands, and all these things have been talked about and tried in other places all across the country. So, you know, it's a difficult problem with no easy solution, or it would already be done.
Are there any statistics kept on the herd as well as our only coal method of transportation taking up here?
Yeah, we do an annual flyover. We did, I actually was in on the first one in 1999. We flew in a fixed wing airplane with a infrared camera and videoed a whole bunch of different areas, and then the white specks would show up. You could actually see the deer on the film. And then after that, we started we did that one time. Then in 2005, we started doing it every year from a helicopter, where we flew 5 areas at first. Now we fly 10 different spots and count the deer from a helicopter. In the wintertime, there has to be snow cover and so forth. There's a whole protocol that we follow to try to keep things the same so we can compare numbers. And it's kind of an inexact science. It's not the best way to count deer, but the idea was to give us an idea of what was happening with the population. And so that takes place every year, and and then we monitor, of course, the car deer accidents are closely watched every year as well.
What did you find from 1999 to 2000?
Well, I actually brought those numbers just in case I got that question. So from the flyover statistics, I brought from 2008 until current. So in 08 it was 184. In 9 it was 134. That was due to EHD when a bunch of deer died. Then in 10 it was back to 180. In 11 it was 217. 12 we never had conditions that we could fly in. Then we saw a jump in 13, 14, 15. We went up to 300 in 14, 244 in 15, and 311 in 16. So there was a significant 3-year jump of almost 100 deer more in the flyover that we counted. So it's gone up a little bit. No, this is the same. The 2005 we only threw the 5, but I'm comparing the same 10 areas. So there's been we have seen an increase in the last 3 years of an average of 286, and the 3 years prior to that increase it was 177. So it went up for sure. Now part of that, that's the problem. You can't just look at the raw numbers and go, well, we have twice as many deer. It doesn't quite work like that. Other things that have changed in the last couple years is there's been a huge amount of development, and so areas that deer used to be, they get pushed around and they move around and they go into areas that they're easier to find, like back here. So it doesn't mean there's twice as many deer necessarily, and the reason I'm fairly confident in saying that is a better indication of population are car deer accidents. That's what the state uses too. So they know that X percentage of deer are going to get hit by cars at any given time in any given area. And so I brought those numbers as well. Our car deer accidents have actually been fairly stable and have actually gone down in the last decade. We hope that it's partially from our education and our signs and all the things that we try to do. But in 2007, was our high water mark of 219, which we pretty much are either first or second as a municipality in car deer accidents. But 2007 was 219. Last year it was 160. So the year before that it was 144. The year before that 170, and then 136, 155. So it's been right in the 160 range from a high of 219. So you would expect if you counted twice as many deer in a flyover, you would expect to see that car deer accident number go way up as well, and that hasn't been the case. So we have to attribute some of that to other factors. That's why the flyover is not a perfect thing. It's just something that we use to kind of give us a rough idea. So, yes. That's a good question. She asked, what's the life expectancy of a deer? It's about 10 years. So give or take, I mean, some deer live longer than that, but as a general rule, because deer are ruminants that chew their cud, it's determined by their teeth. And that's also why we use their teeth to age them. Each year that they're alive, they chew more and more, and their teeth get more and more worn down. And it reaches a point at about 10 years of age where they can't chew anymore. But very few deer reach that. Very few deer reach 10 years of age. So most of them, if they're lucky, if they survive to 7.
Do we have to worry about this deer wasting disease?
Yeah, you know, chronic wasting, I saw that thing come over the DNR wire today that one was found in Jackson County for the first time. So I encourage everyone, and that's how we found EHD, which is everyone familiar with that? It's epizootic hemorrhagic disease. It hadn't been seen in a deer herd in Michigan since 1957 when we had our outbreak. So it was a big deal. And that's what residents started calling and saying, hey, you know, there's a sick deer in my yard. There's a dead deer in my pond. We were pulling them out of the Clinton River, out of Paint Creek, out of Stony Creek. It was horrible. We finally, but to be tested, you have to get one fresh enough that like someone sees it fall over, or it's in their backyard and it wasn't there the night before. You know, it has to be that fresh. And finally, we got one like that, and took it. It went to Rose Lake outside of Lansing, is where the facility is that they test them, and it tested positive for EHD, and so we knew then that we had it. So yeah, we're looking for sick deer, especially when you have a big deer population like we have, where they're coming in contact with a lot of different things, and that's usually when you see illnesses occur, is when you have a high population. They're feeding in close proximity, nose to nose, and that's how they spread TB and all that kind of thing. So any sick deer that you see that's chronic wastings, you know, their head's hanging down, they're lethargic, they're not afraid of people, and of course then they don't eat, so they lose weight and then eventually die.
Is this not a natural solution?
Yeah, well, some people think that's why EHD hit too. So, but I can tell you none of those things are anything that we wish for. Did I see another in the back? Okay, she asked about the deer ticks, and we check with the health department on a fairly regular basis. Michigan is not a big hotbed for the black-legged tick, the tick that carries Lyme disease. The west side of the state has a handful of counties where they've tested positive and know that people have acquired Lyme disease there, but Oakland County, they test the ticks on a regular basis, and they have not found one that has the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. So at this time, now that can change. You know, it's been moving. It started in Lyme, Connecticut. That's how it got its name. It's been moving west ever since. And out east, it's a lot bigger problem, but it's becoming a problem in Michigan too. But it has not been found in Oakland County yet. Yes.
Can a regular dog keep the deer away from the yard?
A dog? She asked if a dog can keep deer away from your yard. This is a relatively new development in our city. We've actually had dogs that have been attacked by deer. I was sent a picture last week of a laceration on a dog's side, which is not normal. But in the springtime, because of the loss of habitat and the places that deer have to reside now, more and more fawns are being born probably in your yard or close to your yard, or if you have a big yard or next to a commons, and those does will protect their fawns. And I would have not believed it if I hadn't seen it for myself. I have a 50-pound dog, and a big doe chased her right into the garage. The deer was in our garage. So, I mean, and I had to chase her out of there and throw a rock at her, and no, I mean, it was, I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't, because my dog, as most dogs do, went to chase the deer, and the deer turned around and turned the tables on her pretty quick and said, nah, we're not playing this game. So, no, I wouldn't use a dog as a deterrent for deer at this point in time.
Or if you see one just laying there, should you be calling somebody?
Yeah, and that happens on a fairly regular basis, that deer that are hit by cars but are still alive, or if they're in your yard and still alive, just laying on the, you call the Oakland County Sheriff and they put them down, and then someone comes and picks it up, depending on what road it is. If it's a county road, the Oakland County, the Road Commission of Oakland County picks it up. If it's a city road, we pick it up. If it's in your yard, typically I pick it up. Lucky me. I know you didn't get all the answers that you wanted. I wish I had that answer for you, but hopefully you took something away from it. Thank you everyone for coming too.